Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today, we're diving into something really fascinating and, well, ultimately quite surprising.
Yeah, definitely. We're looking at the financial side.
Yeah.
The money behind the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
That's right. Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump.
And for this deep dive, we've pulled together, a bunch of sources, mainly the official campaign finance data for the Clinton and Trump campaigns.
Okay.
But to really get the whole picture for you, we're also digging into the spending by outside groups, which was huge.
Right.
And crucially, the impact of what people call earned media.
Exactly. And our mission, kind of as we go through these numbers, is to understand that whole financial landscape because it was such an unexpected election result, wasn't it?
Totally unexpected for many.
Did those, long-held ideas about money buying elections, did they actually hold up in 2016?
That's the big question.
Because you'll remember the candidate who spent way more
Didn't win.
So that's the central puzzle we want to unpack for everyone listening.
And it's worth just remembering the sale here. I mean, the 2016 cycle, record-breaking.
How much are we talking?
Nearly $7 billion in total spending. Just massive amounts of money.
Wow.
And those outside groups we mentioned, they poured in over $1.4 billion themselves.
Okay, so huge sums involved. That definitely sets the stage.
It really does.
All right, let's jump in then. If we look just at the general election fundraising, and I know isolating that perfectly can be, well, tricky.
It's always a bit of an estimate, yeah.
But what do the sources tell us about the money the official campaigns, Clinton and Trump, raised during that, head-to-head part?
Well, the data, it seems to show a pretty clear financial advantage for the Clinton campaign moving into the general.
Okay.
Hillary for America, they're estimated to have raised somewhere around $302 million just for that phase.
$302 million.
And Trump? Donald J. Trump for president, his campaign brought in about $240 million during that same time.
Okay, so, yeah, a noticeable gap right there in the fundraising.
Yeah.
But didn't Trump also make a big deal about, putting his own money in? How much did that self-funding actually matter for him?
Oh, it was absolutely crucial. A really key part of his story. Over the whole cycle, 2015 to 2016,
yeah,
Trump put in, either through contributions or loans, roughly $66 million of his own money.
$66 million?
Yeah. So that definitely helped bridge that gap somewhat compared to Clinton.
Right. Okay, so even with that pretty substantial self-funding, Clinton still had a considerable financial edge heading into the final months.
That's what the numbers suggest, yes.
So let's dig into where the money came from, the sources. What did that look like for each of them?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting because their funding models were just starkly different.
How so?
And the data from the entire cycle really highlights these differences, which mostly carried over into the general. For Hillary Clinton's official campaign.
Yeah.
The main driver was large individual contributions, checks over $200.
Okay. The big donors?
Exactly. That accounted for something like 52.84% of her total, which is about $300 million.
Half her funding, basically.
Pretty much. And what's really telling is, by late June 2016, almost a third, 31.5% of all the money going to Clinton and her related groups came from donors giving over $100,000.
Wow. So really reliant on those high-dollar donors.
It certainly points to a strategy heavily focused on them, yeah.
Okay, so that paints a picture. What about the small donations, the grassroots stuff for Clinton?
Well, small individual contributions, those under $200, they still brought in a significant amount for Clinton, around $105.6 million.
Still a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. That's about 18.58% of her total fundraising. But, and this is key, as a percentage of her overall funds, it was smaller compared to Trump's campaign.
Interesting.
Then you got this other category, other sources for Clinton. That was about 28.32%, or $160 million or so.
Yeah, and what's in there?
That includes money transferred from those joint fundraising committees.
Yeah?
JFCs.
Right, like the Hillary Victory Fund.
Exactly, where they raise money with the party and other groups. Yeah. It also had PAC money. And interestingly, about $2.2 million from registered lobbyists.
$2 million from lobbyists. How did that compare to Trump?
Much more. Trump got, I think, around $129,000 from lobbyists directly to his campaign.
Okay, big difference.
Yeah.
And Clinton's self-funding?
Minimal. Really tiny. About $1.45 million, which is like 0.25%.
Right. Okay, so that seems like a fairly, traditional Democratic fundraising setup. Big checks, established networks, paysees, lobbyists.
It fits that mold pretty well, yeah.
Now flip the coin. Tell us about Trump. What did his funding sources look like?
For Trump, it was almost the mirror image in some ways.
Yeah.
Small individual contributions under $200.
Yeah.
That was a real cornerstone. Made up nearly 26%, 25.94%
Right.
of his campaign committee's money, but $86.7 million.
So a much bigger slice of his pie came from small dollars compared to Clinton.
A noticeably higher percentage, yeah, relative to his total. And then, of course, the big one, his self-financing. We mentioned the $66 million. That was almost 20% of his campaign's funding.
Wow, nearly a fifth.
Yeah, 19.78%. And that really played into the image he was building, you know? The outsider, not beholden to donors.
Right, that narrative he pushed so hard, it fit perfectly.
Absolutely. Now, large individual contributions, over $200 directly to his main campaign committee, that was lower for Trump compared to Clinton.
How much lower?
Only about 14%, roughly $47 million. But, and this is an important point,
Okay.
Trump did ramp up his outreach to big donors later on, especially through those joint fundraising committees, the JFCs.
Ah, okay, so he pivoted a bit.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
By late June 2016, about 24% of the total money raised by Trump and his connected groups came from donors giving $100,000 or more. That was way up from earlier in the campaign.
Interesting. So he started tapping into the bigger money streams later. What about his other sources?
That was a big category for him, too, over 40%, about $134.6 million.
And what's likely in there?
Probably those big transfers from the JFCs, like Trump Victory, and crucially, money from the Republican National Committee, the RNC.
Right, which helped fund the ground game and stuff the main campaign wasn't building as much.
Exactly. The RNC support was vital for those aspects.
It's really fascinating how those different funding streams fed into the whole narrative, isn't it? You had Clinton, sort of the establishment figure with traditional big money support.
Yeah.
And Trump, the populist outsider, leaning on small donors and his own money, at least initially.
It played out perfectly in terms of their messaging.
And that later shift by Trump towards the JFCs and bigger donors, it kind of suggests maybe a recognition that, well, you still need that big money to run a presidential race.
It certainly implies that, yeah. While the small dollars were great for energy and the narrative, the sheer cost of a national general election probably required tapping into those larger sums eventually.
Okay, so we understand who raised what. Now, let's get into how they spent it during the general election. Clinton had that big fundraising lead. How did that look in terms of actual campaign spending?
Oh, it translated very directly into a big spending difference. Consistently.
Yeah.
Throughout the general election, the Clinton campaign just flat out outspent Trump's, often by a lot.
Like, give us an example.
Okay, so July 2016, Clinton's campaign spent around $49 million. Trump's, about $18.4 million.
Yeah, less than half.
Yeah. And if you look cumulatively, by late August, Clinton had spent about $319 million total. Trump, only around $89.5 million.
That's a massive gap.
It is. Some analyses even suggest Clinton spent roughly double per vote she received compared to what Trump spent per vote he got.
Double per vote. That really puts the scale of her operation into perspective. Where was the spending difference most obvious? Like, what were voters seeing?
Paid advertising. That was a big one, especially TV ads.
Right.
Clinton's campaign just invested hugely and early. By the end of July 2016, they'd already spent something like $108 million on TV ads.
$108 million by July.
Yeah. And they'd booked another $80 million for the fall TV push, plus $15 million for radio. It was a media blitz strategy.
All right.
Famously late to the game on paid TV, his first significant ad buy wasn't until mid-August, and it's only about $4.8 million.
It's tiny in comparison.
Tiny. His campaign was clearly relying much, much more heavily on earned media, free media, getting covered by the news.
Which he certainly did. We'll get more into that. But beyond TV ads, what about things like, the ground game? Staff, offices, getting out the vote.
Another huge contrast. By the end of July, Clinton had built this really extensive traditional field operation, like 705 paid staffers across the country.
705. And Trump.
His campaign, much leaner. They reported only 82 paid staffers at that same time.
82. That's skeletal in comparison.
It really is. He relied way more on the RNC's infrastructure, their volunteer network, state parties. They handle a lot of the traditional ground game stuff for him.
So completely different models, reflecting the money, but also strategic choices, I guess.
Absolutely.
What if we look at where the money actually went? Like, who are they paying? The vendors, the consultants?
Yeah, looking at the vendor payments really highlights the different strategies. Clinton's campaign poured huge sums into established media consulting firms like GMB got around $308 million.
$308 million to one firm.
Yeah, for media buying and production, presumably. And big digital firms, too, like Bully Pulpit Interactive got about $33 million. It shows that focus on professional, strategic advertising and online campaigns.
Okay. And Trump's top vendors.
His biggest payments went to firms like Giles Parscale, around $88 million, and American Media and Advocacy Group, about $74 million.
And what were they doing?
Suggests to focus on digital strategy, data analytics.
Right.
Cambridge Analytica got about $6 million from them, too.
Right, the controversial data firm.
Yeah, and also media production, rallies, travel. TAG Air, his own airline company, got nearly $9 billion.
Yeah.
So more digital focus, rallies, maybe less on the traditional TV ad saturation.
So, Clinton, big traditional machine, heavy ad spending. Trump, leaner, digital-focused, leveraging the RNC, relying on rallies, and, well, himself.
That's a pretty good summary. Yeah.
Which brings us back again to that core puzzle. She had this massive spending advantage, especially on ads. Why didn't it lock down the win?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the $350 million question based on the spending cap.
Huh, right.
It just strongly suggests that maybe those traditional expensive tactics, maybe they weren't as effective in 2016's unique climate.
Like diminishing returns?
Could be. Or inefficiencies in how the money was spent. Or maybe just, there's a limit to how much advertising can persuade people, especially against a candidate dominating the news cycle.
And didn't she lose most of those states where she heavily outspent him?
Yeah, that's a killer statistic. She reportedly lost 5 out of the 6 key battleground states where pro-Clinton ads outnumbered pro-Trump ads 3-1.
3-1. And she lost 5 of them.
It really, really challenges that simple idea that whoever spends the most wins. It's clearly not always true.
Okay, let's zoom out now. Look at the whole cycle. 2015, right through Election Day 2016. What were the final totals for the official campaigns? Fundraising and spending.
All right, so for the full cycle, Hillary Clinton's official campaign, Hillary for America, raised $563,756,928.
Over $500 million.
Yep, and spent almost exactly that, $563,433,611.
Okay, and Trump.
Donald J. Trump for president raised $333,127,164 and spent $325,515,461.
So over the whole race, that's about a $230 million fundraising gap and a $238 million spending gap in Clinton's favor, just the official campaign.
That's right. And just to reiterate that point we made, Trump's win, it was a major break from recent history.
So.
First time in the 21st century, maybe even the first time in 40 years, that the candidate who spent less money won the presidency.
That is just the stunning fact when you think about conventional political wisdom.
It really is. It demands explanation.
Okay, so what happens when we try to add in all the outside money, the super PACs, the dark money groups? What do the combined totals look like then? Acknowledging it's harder to track precisely.
Right. The estimates do vary a bit depending on who's counting and what they include.
Yeah.
But the overall picture, it stays the same, just bigger numbers.
Okay.
Combined, Clinton and her allies.
Okay.
So campaign, party, outside groups are estimated to have raised somewhere around $770 million. Some estimates push that higher, even towards $1.2 billion.
$1 billion, potentially?
Potentially, yeah, depending on how you count DNC funds and everything. And their spending was in that same massive ballpark.
And for Trump and his allies?
Raised around $433 million combined, again, with some estimates maybe closer to $600 million total. Spending was similar.
So even with the outside money factored in?
The bottom line is consistent across all the data. Clinton and her allies significantly outraised and outspent Trump and his allies, often cited as more than 2-1.
More than 2-1 spending advantage, and still lost the Electoral College.
Exactly.
That gap, maybe $350 million or more in combined spending, what could that buy? I mean, that's a lot of field offices, ads, staffers.
It's a huge amount of resources. You could run multiple state-level campaigns with that kind of money. It really forces you, the listener, to ask, why wasn't that overwhelming financial force enough?
It certainly does. And to really get at that why, I think we have to talk about those other major factors you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. You cannot understand the finances of 2016 without talking about the outside groups in more detail and, crucially, earned media.
Right. Let's tackle outside money first. We know it exploded after Citizens United. What did that look like in 2016 for the presidential race?
Yeah. 2016 saw record outside spending overall. Over $1.4 billion total across all races.
Wow.
And for the presidential race specifically, it was around $749 million.
$750 million just from outside groups on the presidency.
Yeah. And just like with the campaigns, pro-Clinton outside groups spent way more than pro-Trump groups.
Any key players?
The biggest spender, by far, was Priorities USA Action. That was the main pro-Clinton super PAC. They spent $132 million just by themselves.
$132 million from one group, so a lot of independent firepower backing Clinton. What were the overall totals for outside spending for and against each candidate?
Okay, so Open Secrets data gives us a pretty good picture. Outside groups spent a total of $206 million supporting Clinton. That breaks down to about $89 million for her and $110 million against Trump.
Okay, so more spent attacking Trump by pro-Clinton groups than promoting her directly. Interesting.
Yeah. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. If you look at all outside groups, the total amount spent against Donald Trump was a massive $252.7 million.
$250 million spent just attacking Trump by outside groups.
Exactly, from all sorts of groups, not just pro-Clinton ones. And on the Trump side, total outside spending supporting him was about $100 million.
Okay.
That's about $72 million directly for him. And again, that huge $252.7 million spent against him.
So Clinton had more outside money supporting her overall, but Trump faced an absolute avalanche of negative spending from outside groups.
That's the dynamic. He was the target of an unprecedented amount of attack money, even though his own supporting outside groups, like Great America, PAC, and Rebuilding America, now were outspent by the pro-Clinton ones.
That's a really complex picture. Okay, now let's pivot to the other huge factor, earned media. You said it was unprecedented. Explain that.
It really was. The estimates are just staggering. Donald Trump is estimated to have received something like $5 billion with a B, billion dollars worth of free earned media coverage over the whole cycle.
$5 billion compared to Clinton.
Clinton got maybe $2.5 billion worth. So Trump got roughly double the media attention value.
That's incredible.
Some estimates put his primary season earned media alone at $2 billion. Month after month, he just dominated the news cycle in terms of sheer volume.
How did he do that? How did he generate so much free coverage, basically canceling out his paid media disadvantage?
It was, well, a mix of things, wasn't it? His whole campaign style, the massive rallies, which got tons of coverage.
Right.
His often controversial statements that the media couldn't ignore. His constant use of Twitter to drive the narrative.
Yeah, Twitter was huge for him.
And just appearing on news shows constantly. There was even talk, his strategy was just to suck all the oxygen out of the room.
And it seems like it worked in terms of getting attention.
It really did. That constant, intense media spotlight helped make up for the lack of paid ads, financially speaking.
But wait, wasn't a lot of that coverage negative? I mean, the press wasn't exactly singing his praises most of the time.
That's the crucial, complicated part. Yes, absolutely. While he got more coverage, a lot of it was negative.
Like how much?
One study suggested about 23% of his coverage was negative, compared to maybe 12% for Clinton. Another analysis looking just at the general election found his coverage was maybe 77% negative versus 64% for Clinton. Though overall, for the whole cycle, Clinton might have actually faced more negative press total. It's complex.
So does that debunk the all publicity is good publicity idea?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But he won, despite all that negative coverage, which strongly suggests that maybe, for his base at least, the sheer volume of attention keeping him constantly in the conversation and his ability to frame the narrative himself through rallies and Twitter, maybe that mattered more than the negative tone of the mainstream coverage.
He controlled the conversation, even if the conversation wasn't always flattering.
Something like that, yeah. He stayed front and center.
So we had this fundamental clash then. Clinton's financial capital versus Trump's massive media capital.
That's a great way to put it.
It seems like Trump just substituted media attention for dollars.
He found a way to make it work, it seems.
And it really makes you question how effective all that pro-Clinton spending, especially from outside groups, actually was, if Trump is just dominating the news 24/7.
Exactly. Does another TV ad even register? It raises that question about diminishing returns for paid media when one candidate just owns the earned media space. Maybe those ad dollars just weren't as impactful in that specific environment.
Okay, so we've laid it all out. The campaign spending, the outside groups, the earned media dominance. Let's circle back to the big question we started with. Did money buy the 2016 election? What's the verdict?
Well, if you're looking for a simple yes, 2016 definitely doesn't give it to you. In fact, it provides some pretty strong evidence against that simple deterministic idea that more money equals guaranteed victory, at least at the presidential level.
Because Trump won despite being massively outspent.
Right. Across the board, official campaign, combined spending with allies, he was at a significant financial disadvantage.
So if money wasn't the deciding factor, what was it? What were those non-financial things that likely pushed Trump over the top?
Oh, it was almost certainly a combination of things. His message, his specific appeal, it clearly resonated with enough voters in the right places. That earned media dominance we just talked about gave him incredible reach. His whole unconventional strategy, the rallies, the social media, it cut through.
And the Electoral College focus?
Absolutely. Targeting specific states effectively. On the flip side, for Clinton, maybe her money wasn't spent as efficiently as it could have been. Maybe the ads hit diminishing returns, maybe some strategic mistakes.
Like what kind of mistakes?
Well, things people talked about at the time, maybe not showing enough enthusiasm. The email controversy lingered. Perhaps not spending enough time in certain key states like Wisconsin or Michigan until very late.
I remember reading some analysis suggesting her late visits did help where she went.
Right, which kind of implies that maybe not being there earlier or more often was a missed opportunity that money alone couldn't fix at the last minute.
But we shouldn't just write off money entirely, should we? It still has to matter. You can't run for president with $0.
Oh, absolutely not. Money is still crucial. You need a baseline level of funding just to be credible. Staff, travel, offices, basic ads. Trump still spent hundreds of millions, remember?
Good point.
And even that free media. It wasn't entirely free. It cost his time, required strategic effort to generate, needed digital teams to amplify. There's a cost associated with it.
Right.
Plus, where the money comes from matters for the narrative, like we discussed. Small donors for Trump's populist image. Big donors for Clinton's established campaign. Money shapes the kind of campaign you run.
And what does the broader research say? Does money matter more in other kinds of races?
Generally, yeah. Academic studies often suggest money has a bigger impact in lower information races, like down-ballot contests, where voters don't know the candidates as well. Campaign finance rules obviously shape things too, and contributions might buy access or influence policy later, even if they don't guarantee election wins.
So the debate isn't really if money matters.
No, it's more about how much it matters and how it influences things, especially compared to other factors like candidate quality, message, media, and the political environment.
Okay, so summing it up, 2016 was this really complex mix. Money mattered, but it wasn't decisive on its own.
Exactly. It was this intricate dance between financial resources and all these non-financial factors. Trump just showed, very dramatically, how earned media could potentially level the playing field against a huge financial disadvantage in a presidential race.
Does this mean the old playbook is dead? Is it all about earned media now?
That's the big question going forward, isn't it?
It certainly suggests a potential shift, maybe making massive paid ad campaigns less of a silver bullet than they used to be, especially if a candidate can capture the public's attention so effectively through other means.
And it's interesting, voters always say they worry about money in politics.
They do.
But their votes can clearly be swayed by other things. Authenticity, message, just wanting to shake things up. Absolutely. And we can't forget the Electoral College. Clinton won the popular vote after all. Trump won by targeting spending and attention very efficiently in those key swing states. So maybe it's not just how much money, but how and where you spend it that's becoming even more critical.
Right. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main headline? The key takeaway about money and the 2016 election?
I think the core takeaway is this. 2016 showed us a scenario where truly massive spending by Clinton and her allies just wasn't enough to guarantee a win. Donald Trump, facing that big financial gap, managed to win by powerfully leveraging earned media and a very unconventional campaign strategy.
So it really complicates that simple narrative. Money buys elections, especially at the presidential level.
It complicates it immensely. It highlights that elections are decided by this really complex dynamic mix. Money, yes, but also message, strategy, media, voter mood, all of it interacting.
Okay, fascinating stuff. And that leaves us with a really provocative thought for you, our listener, to chew on. After seeing the power of earned media in 2016, is that traditional, heavily funded campaign model kind of going obsolete?
Or will things swing back? Will future campaigns find a new balance between spending money and commanding media attention?
What does 2016 tell us about how political campaigns are evolving and maybe what really connects with voters these days?
Lots to think about there.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.